Hello everybody, and either welcome or welcome back to the Gender Libertarian Podcast. If you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Libertarian Institute. So for this week's weekly roundup, I want to do a couple of different immigration-based stories because I want to kind of cycle back to the ICE workplace raids that kind of got buried underneath mass shootings and Jeffrey Epstein's suicide. And since we've already discussed all those topics to death over the past couple of episodes, I want to cycle back to those workplace raids because I do have some thoughts on that. And also, there has been some developments over this past week as far as legal immigration is concerned, and as to who can and cannot apply for asylum in the United States. Yeah, things got a little weird this week, so let's go ahead and go back to the ICE workplace raids. Those happened on August 7th, and in the raids themselves, ICE rounded up about 680 people from 5 different processing plants in Mississippi. Agricultural processing plants, chicken processing plants, stuff like that. And then it came out over this past week that one of the plants actually fired an additional 100 people after the raids. So you're looking at about 780 people who are now out of a job. And I want you to kind of keep that in mind as we go forward, because I think that is an important kind of facet of this too that a lot of people aren't talking about. But so that's where we're at with that. Roughly half of the people that ICE took into custody on the 7th have been released into various sorts of programs where there's ankle trackers and stuff like that, where the ICE can, if they so choose, and by the way, this is by ICE's discretion, and they can do this for anybody in their custody at any time. I want to go ahead and point that out. But they can choose to release people back into the community with tracking devices and to keep an eye on them in that way versus keeping them in detention. So a reason a lot of those people, I do think, ended up getting released is because of what happened after the raids. I want to go ahead and make something clear because I don't think a lot of people understand when ICE does these sorts of raids. And for what it's worth, this is the largest workplace raid we've seen since the Bush era. Even Obama did not do workplace raids of this particular scale. He did do workplace raids, but the numbers that we're talking here, we haven't seen in a very long time. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind, especially going forward, after we kind of talk about the fallout and the aftermath of these sorts of things, and to think about the fact that this could happen again. But when ICE does these raids, they don't coordinate with any kind of child protective services or anything. So what ended up happening is you had all of these people rounded up, taken into custody, and you had kids who got orphaned for a short period of time because nobody coordinated with the schools. And this happened on the first day of school for these kids. Nobody coordinated with the schools or let anybody know. So all of a sudden you had kids, small young kids, who just had both parents arrested, and now they're just on the side of the street crying because they have no adults to take care of them. So thankfully, the communities came together, got shelter for these kids, got food for these kids, until at least one parent was released from custody to go take care of the children. So that's why I say I think that's the reason why a lot of people did get released back into the community, is because you had these kids who had no parents. You had to have at least one parent in the house to take care of a small child. And it's just, of course, you've probably seen the videos if you were on Twitter of these kids just basically standing on the sidewalk crying because you're released from school and you have no parents to go home to. And the schools were we don't know what else to do. You can't just keep kids in the school, and you can't release kids to just anybody. If anybody who has kids, when you go to enroll them in school, you have to give the list of people who can pick up your child, can check out your child, and schools are not supposed to release children to anybody not on that list. So now, if all of a sudden, if it's just mom and dad and kid, and there's not really like a third person who's authorized to go pick that kid up, like, now what? So it ended up being this whole clusterfuck for these poor kids. As far as I know, all of the kids are back in houses with at least one parent at this point, which that's a good thing, but just the fact that, and I find it hard to believe that if this was a year in the making, that nobody involved in planning this raid looked at a calendar, realized that this was going to be the first day of school, and thought, you know, maybe we should do this, I don't know, some day that isn't the first day of school? Like maybe a week before, when these kids would be presumably, I would assume, either in daycare or with somebody else who's watching the kids while the parents are at work, instead of them being in school, because that just created a whole nother wrinkle and a whole nother just piece of the clusterfuck that ended up being these workplace raids. So it just, it goes to the idea that the cruelty is the point. Like I said, I find it very hard to believe that that wasn't done intentionally. And like, that's, you don't fucking traumatize kids like that. Like, come on. Like, don't do that. Like, there was no need for that to go down like that. And then to have all these people scramble to try to take care of these kids, because I'm like, of course you can't just leave kids on the street. Like, of course people are going to try to figure out something, but like, you had nobody from like CPS, no social workers, nobody there from the government to try to do anything for these kids who just all of a sudden are parentless for God knows how long they were going to be parentless for. Like, there was no guarantee that they were going to have parents released within 24 hours to take care of them. And like, what if there wasn't? What if it was 48 hours or 72 hours? What if it was a week? What if it was a month? Like, what were they supposed to do with these kids? Like, honestly, like, that's, oh my God, that really bothered me. Like, just the complete blatant disregard for the fact that you're making kids orphans for nothing. Like, honestly, nothing, people. But what I do want to talk about is why did this even happen in the first place? Like, what? And I get it. I know why it happened. I know it's a rhetorical question. I know why it happened. But from just a space of pure, like, logistical, who did this benefit? Like, who did this benefit? I mean, it certainly didn't help the employees, who now, I mean, whether you're still in custody, whether they're out of custody, they don't have a job. And obviously, if you live here and you have a house and you have, like, responsibilities, you have kids, you kind of need a job, you need to have money coming in. So now you have some households that have no workers anymore. You have some households that have one worker who are used to being a 2-income household. And so now that's a consideration that these people have to take into account. And these processing plants are not located in, like, large cities. This isn't the Industrial Revolution anymore. Like, usually these plants are in very small, very rural towns where not only is it going to be very difficult for those who just lost their jobs to find another job, it's going to be very difficult for the employers who just lost their employees to be able to fill those spots again. Because, be it as it may, like, the chicken still has to get processed. Like, somebody still has to debone the chicken, somebody still has to do this work, somebody still has to put the chicken in the box and get it ready to ship. Like, things still have to go. Like, the assembly line still has to keep cranking. But now there's nobody to work the assembly lines, and it's not like you can just go out and replace that many people just like that. Like, that's going to take time. So now it's affecting the employers, and feel however you want to feel about people who employ people who are not legally able to work in this country. And that's a distinction that I think a lot of people don't understand, is you can be in this country legally and not be able to legally work in this country. Like, it's a weird thing because it's adjacent, but they're two separate issues. And, like, you can be here as an asylum seeker or a refugee, but you still have to apply for a work permit, and there is a wait time for that work permit. You can be here on various visas. Like, obviously, if you're here on a tourist visa, clearly you're not authorized to work in the United States because you're not supposed to be working. Student visas, it's very tricky as to whether you can or cannot work and what kind of work you can do and how much of it you can do. And like I said, there's certain visas and there's certain legal statuses in the United States where you're here legally, but you can't work legally. But obviously, if you're here, you need to work because you have bills to pay. So that's a conversation that I think really should come out of this, is that disconnect between being here and being able to work here, and making it to where these people who are here, whether they're here legally or not, and a lot of these people that got wrapped up in this have been here for decades. Like, they've built lives here, they've gotten married, they have kids, they've bought houses, they've been part of the community. And so now, like, but there's no path for them. Like, there's no path for citizenship to them, depending on how they got here. There's no path for them to be able to legally work here. And so that's something that needs to be addressed, because, I mean, the disconnect is wild when you understand, like, that's what it is. And, like, it's not as simple as a lot of people like to make it out to be. And people that look at it like, well, you've been here for XYZ years, why don't you just get legal? Like, it's not that simple. Like, it's not just like going to the DMV and getting your driver's license. Like, unless you came here under either very specific circumstances or through a very specific chain of events, there may not be a path to legal citizenship for you. Like, there just may not legally be one. So, yeah, there's issues here that I wish people would drill down a little deeper on and talk about. And it's something I try to do, because I know it's something that not a lot of people know about. Because it's kind of, immigration is a very weird topic, and it's something that is very complicated. There's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of assumptions that people make that sound right when you make the assumption, but then when you know what it is and what the legal process is for becoming a citizen or working legally in this country, they start to break down, and they break down in ways where you just kind of look at it and you're like, what the fuck? Like, what? Why? This makes no sense. It's like, no, it makes no sense. That's why we need to address it. But moving back to the Mississippi towns, obviously the workers have not benefited from this. The employers have not benefited from this. The towns are not going to benefit from this either, because, like I said, these are small rural towns. Like, usually in these sorts of towns, like, the processing plant is kind of the only game in town as far as, like, large scale employment. And all the other businesses that are there service the people who work in the processing plants. Like, obviously the other stores, restaurants, various kind of, like, service oriented businesses, stuff like that. So now when all of a sudden you have all these people out of a job, it's going to affect everybody in that town, because obviously now they're not going to be able to spend money. So this is going to hurt the supermarkets. It's going to hurt, I mean, pretty much any place where somebody would spend money, like restaurants, gas stations, like anywhere, any place that requires you to spend money is going to be affected by this raid, because again, you just made a whole bunch of people unemployed. And in fact, one of these towns actually lost 10% of their workforce in this raid. Like, can you imagine all of a sudden just losing 10% of the people in a town that have any kind of economic purchasing power? Like, that's going to be catastrophic for the towns in general. And so it's just this whole huge thing that, like, what? I don't feel any safer. I don't think anybody else feels any safer. Like, you fucked with people who were working and trying to make a living and trying to provide for their families and try to be participants in their community. Like, we're not talking like you ran in here and busted up an MS-13 cell. You messed with people who were just trying to get by. And, like, what? This didn't do anything for national security or local security. It throws these places into a total fucking tailspin. Now you've got members of the community, you've got people in the churches who are now having to not only figure out a way to support themselves, but try to support these people who just lost their jobs. And it's just like, why? It helped nothing. This helped nothing and nobody, other than to be able to parade it around and to try to scare other immigrants into thinking that this might happen to them. And these are not the people that you need to be worried about. Like, these are people who are working. They're people who are trying to be self-sufficient and exist on their own and just create a life like just anybody else. Like, these are not the people, these are not the ones you need to worry about. These are the ones who've kind of got it together. You need to worry about the violent ones. You need to worry about the ones committing actual crimes, not the crime of not working with the right papers in the United States of America, which is already a stupid thing anyway. Because employers should be able to employ whoever the hell they want. Same way people who want to rent property should be able to rent it to whoever the hell they want. Like, it's none of the government's business. And on the topic of these jobs, because a lot of people do like to make the point that these are not great jobs. No, they're not. They're kind of gross, if we're being completely honest. They're physically demanding. You're in very cold conditions. You're on your feet. You're expected to work very fast, but very precisely. And a lot of people seem to be under the impression that these immigrants are working for below minimum wage, which they are not. The average per hour that you make in these chicken processing plants is anywhere between $12 to $15 an hour. So they're not horribly paying jobs. I mean, they're not super great, but they are jobs that require a very specific skill set. And I don't want to say they're low-skilled jobs, because they're not. Like, I can't do that job. Like, I don't know how to debone a chicken. It'd probably take me like an hour to debone one chicken. Like, I would last like maybe half a day in a chicken processing plant, because I don't have those skills. But these people do. So let's employ them, because they know how to do the job, and just leave them the fuck alone. Like, why? Why? Just so much of immigration to me is just like, why? There's so many easier ways to handle all of this, and it just blows my mind that these poor people now have to figure out a way of how they're going to survive now, because somebody wanted to make this big show raid so they can say that they did this, that, and the other. And it's like, congratulations, you helped nobody, you didn't make the country any safer, you inconvenienced a hell of a lot of people, you traumatized children, and yeah. And you accomplish nothing. And I'm sure this cost a lot of money, too. I'm sure this cost a lot of taxpayer money to put on this big show of rounding up people working in a chicken plant. Like, this is just stupid on every fucking level it can possibly be stupid. And that's why I want to talk about it, because it's just irritating and frustrating to see stuff like this happen when, I mean, you could, if ICE completely limited their involvement to actual violent immigrants, like gang members, like the actual rapists and murderers that Donald Trump talks about, okay, I could understand their purpose a little better. But when your job is to just go around and round up people who aren't hurting anybody, who aren't a threat to anybody, people who are just trying to live their life, and then you throw them in a cage when these people haven't done anything violent to warrant being thrown into a cage, that's where you lose me, ICE, and that's what 90% of what ICE does. And so that's why we can just abolish ICE. Abolish ICE so these people can be left the hell alone. And that's it. Alright, but moving on from that to the most recent kind of rule change regarding legal immigration that has happened over the past week, and that is the change to the public charge rule. Now, let me try to explain this, because there's a lot of people who have talked about it and have misconstrued what the rule change is. Basically, here's how this is supposed to work out now. And I want to emphasize that this pertains solely to legal immigration. This pertains to the people who are, quote unquote, doing it legally. This does not pertain to people who are here illegally. This does not pertain to people who are in the asylum process or the refugee process or have any other humanitarian status. Their situations remain unchanged as to their ability to access any kind of entitlements. So, this is for people who are in or attempting to enter the legal immigration process. Be it you're somebody who is trying to change your legal status from either like temporary to permanent resident, or you're trying to get a green card, or you're applying on behalf of a prospective employee, giving them a visa, whether you are a family member who's sponsoring another family member coming into the country, getting visas like that. It does apply to those who get visas via the lottery. So basically anybody, like I said, in the legal immigration system outside of people who are in like the humanitarian side of the immigration system. So what happens now is you go in and you say that you want to either change your status or you want to sponsor somebody who is coming into the United States for whatever reason you're sponsoring them. What will happen now is each one of these people will be examined based on a criteria of whether they are more likely than not to ever receive any kind of public welfare benefits. Now, how do we get there? Well, there is a list of criteria that is supposed to be applied. And to make it clear, even per DHS's announcement, this is a subjective process. It will be done on a case-by-case basis, which means there's no way of knowing ahead of time whether or not you will or will not pass this particular test. And it's basically based on like current income levels, whether you can speak English, what kind of skills you have, what kind of education you have, whether you have used any kind of public welfare in the past, if you're somebody who's already like here legally and already has access to benefits. Yeah. And more likely than not has not been defined. Like there's no definition of saying that we think you are 75% might go on public assistance, maybe 50%, 30, 20. There's no number attached to this. So it's all this very, very nebulous sort of thing. And the form that has been released that maybe you, I mean the royal you, like if you are somebody going through this process, you may have to fill it out or you have your lawyer fill it out. And there's things pertaining to like credit scores, tax returns, even if your tax returns are from another country. It's like, it's nuts. And the reason why this is kind of such of a big deal is, first off, you're asking DHS to be able to be psychic. Because how is anybody supposed to be able to tell who is and is not going to end up on public assistance? Like, I'm sorry, do they have precogs over at DHS now? Like, do they have people that can see the future? I mean, you can sit here and try to parse out whether somebody is or is not going to go on public assistance because this, that, or the other reason. But honestly, who knows? Like, I couldn't tell you if maybe 5 years down the road if I'm not going to be on public assistance. Like, I can't tell you that. And nobody can tell that about anybody. The second thing is, this is also used as a deterrent to keep people who are legally entitled to public welfare benefits. Feel about that however you want to feel, but there are certain classes of legal non-citizens who do have access to public welfare benefits, usually based on the fact that you've been here for X amount of years. Like usually, I think on a green card, it's either 3 or 5 years you have to be here. So you're trying to dissuade people from doing something that is perfectly legal for them to do by holding like future citizenship status over their head. Like, and you can already tell how this is going to get used. Like you already know that there is going to be people denied because the whole thing is just so sketchy and nebulous that like, how can you even prove that? Like, how could you prove anything? Honestly, like the whole thing is just so bizarre. And I want to try to explain, and I'm going to borrow somebody else's words. David Beer actually wrote about this back when the public charge rule was first put out in public for public view, public commentary, to try to illustrate just how insane this new rule change is going to be. The new definition will consider immigrants public charges if the government claims that they will be likely to use more than 15% of the poverty line. That is $1,802 annually, or $5 per day for a single individual. DHS determined Medicaid cannot be monetized, so it will treat enrollment for 12 months or more in any 36-month period as equal to the 15% figure. For example, someone who will make 150% of the poverty line, $18,210, and is projected to receive $1,821, $5 a day, in means-tested benefits would be deemed a public charge, even though they are 90% self-sufficient. Indeed, even the people who the government itself projects will be 95% self-sufficient could easily be deemed a public charge. And see, that's why I wanted to point out the difference on that more likely than not. And as David points out, they're using it basically not to say that we think this person is going to be wholly dependent on public aid, but to say that we think this person may receive some level of aid at some point in the future, so no. Again, and here's the thing. A lot of people are portraying this as saying that this means that these immigrants are no longer eligible for welfare or public assistance. That's not what this is at all. That would be illegal. That you can't just change rules like that arbitrarily without Congress's approval. Like, who is and is not eligible for welfare is the purview of Congress. So yes, these people are still eligible for whatever welfare they are legally eligible to. What this is going to do is dissuade those people from getting the things that, again, they are legally entitled to, on the basis that this will damage you in the future if you do choose to go forward with any kind of citizenship status. Okay. Here's the thing. And here's my problem with the public change rule, aside from the obvious messing with people who are trying to do this legally and are exercising their legal options to receive public welfare if they are so eligible. There's already a system in place that essentially guarantees that people who are coming in here legally through visas don't receive any kind of welfare that they're not entitled to. And it's called an affidavit of support. And what has to happen, like if you are sponsoring somebody to come into this country, whether you're doing it, you're going to be their employer and they're your employee, or it's a family member, or however it is that you're sponsoring this person in the visa process, you have to sign a legally binding agreement that if the person you're sponsoring receives any kind of public aid that they are not legally entitled to, you are on the hook for paying back the U.S. government for those welfare benefits that person got that they weren't supposed to get, up until the point where your sponsee either becomes a U.S. citizen or has been in America for 10 years. So that is a problem that has already been solved as far as being worried about these people accessing any kind of welfare benefits that they're not legally entitled to. Like, that's already, the question's already been asked and answered. The problem's already been solved. There's already a mechanism in place for getting back any of that money that somebody might get that they weren't entitled to. But to me, the bigger conversation that should be coming out of this is the conversation about who is and is not eligible for welfare. And that is a perfectly fine conversation to have if that is the conversation that anybody wants to have. I mean, I don't think you will find a single libertarian who does not agree that the welfare state either needs to be drastically cut back or eliminated altogether for everybody. So if that is where the conversation wants to go, that's fine. But this public change rule, this public charge rule, you're setting up a system where you are punishing a certain group of people for exercising their legal rights to do a thing. That's not okay. That's not how this is supposed to work. You're like kind of trying to back end welfare reform for a certain group of people based on their citizenship status. And like I said, welfare reform is the purview of Congress, not of the executive branch. And creating this kind of weird sort of, if you do, or if we think you're going to, we're going to deny your request for citizenship or deny your ability to keep going forward in the citizenship process, is no. It's just no. You can't penalize people for doing something that they're legally allowed to do. Like, that just makes no damn sense. And there are already lawsuits that have been filed against it. I know there's one out in California. There's been a couple of others that have popped up. But again, we could have a conversation about welfare reform. Obviously, I know that's not going to happen any more so than we're going to have a conversation about people being able to legally work in the United States, because nobody really wants to talk about the core issues here. That's the problem. It's not that these people are getting something that they're not entitled to. It's the welfare system. It's the welfare state. Can we bring the conversation there? Can we talk about that? That's the problem. And no, I do not think that the welfare state is any kind of special magnet for people coming to the United States. That's a whole nother ball of wax, but I think it's time to start trying to have a discussion about scaling back the welfare state for this reason, for the reasons of people thinking that it is a magnet for people coming here. Like, okay, the problem isn't immigration then. The problem is the welfare state. So getting rid of immigration does not fix the welfare state. We need to get rid of that. Like, it seems to me like there's a very easy, elegant solution to the problem, but nobody really wants to look at that side of the equation, because again, that would affect everybody in the United States, including native-born people. And let's face it, touching entitlements is a third rail. I know. But if you're genuinely concerned that people are gaming the system and that people are getting things that they're not legally entitled to, well then maybe let's look less at the people and more at the system that they're allegedly gaming and figure out, well, how do we either fix that or how do we eliminate this system? It seems kind of intuitive to me, but nobody else seems to want to have that discussion. There's a lot of discussions people don't want to have, and that's another reason immigration is one of those very hard topics to cover, because everybody wants to demagogue it, everybody wants to bumper sticker slogan it, and there are deeper issues at play that do need to be discussed and do need to be addressed, but nobody seems to have the political will to actually have these conversations in the places where they need to be had. Like, Congress needs to start addressing immigration reform. Congress needs to start addressing entitlements in the welfare state. Like, these are things that they have to happen. Like, we cannot continue upon either one of these paths the way we have. Somebody's got to stand up and say something and be like, well, this isn't working. This is insane. We need to fix these systems so that everybody can be on the same page and everybody can understand how they need to come here legally and everybody can have a path to come here legally. And we don't have to worry about people getting things that they're not entitled to because of this welfare state and blah, 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 blah. Just fix those. Just fix those. Don't try to fix the people. Try to fix the systems that are allegedly broken, according to some people. Obviously, yes, the immigration system and the welfare system are broken in ways that are legitimate. Not necessarily that everybody makes the best legitimate argument for the reasons why they're broken, but that's just me. But nobody else really wants to have that conversation, sadly. So, moving on, because I'm sure that's a topic I will end up coming back to over and over and over again, and I will beat all of you over the head over immigration until everybody knows what's going on, at least. But the last story I want to cover is the asylum ban that was, and then wasn't, and now kind of is-ish. What ended up happening, and I talked about this before, is the Ninth Circuit decided that the proposed Asylum Ban 2.0, which, to refresh, under the Asylum Ban 2.0, it would force people to apply for asylum in various countries that they travel through before they get to the U.S. in order to apply for asylum in the U.S. Now, we don't have a safe third country agreement with Mexico. We, I guess, kind of have one with Guatemala now. It's very weird and very up in the air, especially since they just had an election. And Guatemala's Supreme Court and their Congress was not on board with this in the first place, so I'm not entirely sure where we stand with that. But legally speaking, there is nothing that requires anybody to apply for asylum in any country other than the U.S. if they travel from anywhere in the Northern Triangle or in Mexico, to apply anywhere other than the United States if the United States is where they wish to apply for asylum. So, what the Ninth Circuit decided this past week is that their decision only applies to the physical parameters of the Ninth Circuit. So, basically, in like California, the ports of entry there, the various entry places that you can enter there, do still abide by the Ninth Circuit's ruling. The states outside of the Ninth Circuit's ruling, which for the purposes of this, you would be looking at Arizona and Texas, the Ninth Circuit's ruling does not apply to those states, and so therefore Asylum Ban 2.0 would be in effect if you tried to enter into the United States through one of those states. So what we have right now is a border, but depending on where you're trying to enter the United States, there's different rules as to what you needed to do before you got here in order to be here. Yeah, that's insane, and it makes no damn sense, and I can already tell you what's going to happen, because this is exactly what happened when Trump said that they were no longer going to honor any kind of asylum requests from anybody who doesn't enter at a port of entry. Obviously, if you are somebody who is already waiting at a port of entry in Texas or New Mexico, you're going to probably go over to California, you're going to go over to Tijuana, you're going to go over to Mexicali, and then any other immigrants who are coming up are going to go there. And it's going to create this insane overcrowding problem that already exists, especially in Tijuana. Because, I mean, well, duh. Like, what else could possibly happen? Like, if you know, okay, I can go through door A, or I can not go through door B, you're going to go to door A. And it's already a bad situation, especially in Tijuana, because of the migrant protection protocols and because of metering. And there's been a lot of nonsense going on that level, too, of apparently people are getting bussed here, there, and everywhere, like thousands of miles away from the U.S.-Mexico border, but they have court dates in the U.S., and so now how the hell are these people going to make their court dates? Because now you're all the way the hell over here instead of at the border, and then how are you supposed to cross the border anyway to make it to your court date? The whole thing is just a straight fucking disaster, and it's starting to really reach critical mass. And this asylum ban decision is just going to make a bad situation that much worse, because it's going to create overcrowding at certain ports of entry, and then other ports of entry are going to turn into ghost towns. Because why would you go there? Like, that wouldn't even make any sense. So, we shall see what ends up happening with that. But yeah, it's just it's a mess. The whole border situation is just a straight fucking mess, and it's so sad because it doesn't have to be this way. Like, there's so many other ways that we could be handling immigration in this country, and even if you do think this is an invasion or just some kind of massive mass of humanity trying to overtake the United States, like, there's still better ways to deal with this. Like, there's better ways than keeping people in ICE or CPB custody. There's better ways than shoving people back into Mexico and points beyond to wait for, first off, their name to even be called, and then you get shoved back down there to wait for your court date, which, again, how are you supposed to make a court date if you're not in the United States? Like, that makes no damn sense. How are you supposed to get here if you're not in the country? How are you supposed to make your court date? How are you supposed to hire a lawyer? How are you supposed to build your case? Like, oh my god. Anyway, at this point, I've gone on long enough, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. So, as usual, if you did make it this far, thank you for listening. And if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, and Libertarian Institute. Take care, and until next time.